We are delighted tonight to be joined by our member, Olga, who is a performance artist, a book editor, and a musician for an address. Please join me in welcoming our speaker.
I joined Pussy Riot when, in 2016, a year after I left my job in the police. I was 18 years old when I suddenly had this crazy idea that I want to be useful for society and I can do that in Russian police. Quite soon I've realized that the system itself is designed in a bit different way. I've been taught how to follow commands and orders rather than to work with people seeking help. I've been told that if there is a person that needs to be detained, we'll find a charge. I left the police and became an activist. I was working with political prisoners and then joined Pussy Riot. During 2 years in prison, Pussy Riot established a media outlet called Media Zona. It's available in English as well. That was the first media in Russia that started to focus their journalism on covering police brutality, prison violence, and court trials. In Russia, we say, if you want to learn about Russia, look at their prisons, because it's a country in the miniature form. And since Putin started a full-scale war in Ukraine, we've been touring with our show Riot Days, which we call a punk manifesto. On these concerts, we raise money for Ukrainian Children's Hospital Ahmadit in Kyiv. So far, we've attracted more than 80,000 euros. We're often asked, what can be done to stop the war? But let's learn what led to this war. Putin became president in 2000. In his interview, he states that Russia is a part of European culture, and he looks forward to establishing close cooperation with the West, Europe, United States, and NATO. But within a year, he begins to control the media, primarily television. Later, this television will lie about the details of the tragedies that will occur in his first term, like sinking of the Kursk submarine, the terrorist attack in the school in Beslan, the terrorist attack in Moscow, and many others. Since then, there has not been a single TV channel in Russia that has not been a propaganda mouthpiece. All state channels are connected to Putin and his gang, and they work directly to keep him in power. Lies in the news, forbidden topics, and taboo names. The Russian public does not have an access to independent information on television. It is very important for me to tell you about this, because without such powerful Third Reich propaganda, there would be no Vladimir Putin. In 2012, the protest on Bolotnaya Square was motivated by claims by Russian and foreign journalists, political activists, and members of the public that the election process was fraudulent. As a result, criminal cases were opened against 17 activists. Many of them received prison terms of 4 and 5 years for trying to drag the policemen away so that they would stop beating people. This was the biggest protest and the last one that gathered so many people. If fascist regime in the 20th century chose mass repressions in order to suppress anti-government activities, Putin's neo-fascism is focused on political opponents and brutal trials. Demonstrative repressions do not obey any law. This is how fear is born. In other words, the political persecution of activists from Bolotnaya showed everyone in the country that what will be the price if they are thinking about the protest. Putin's regime divides activists and society. The status of an activist automatically means that Russian law will be applied differently than to majority of citizens. By the time Putin annexed Crimea in 2013, Russians protested the falsified election results, protested against the new anti-constitution laws, protested against the persecution of Michael Khodorkovsky, Pussy Riot, and against the corruption in the government. The most popular slogans have remained unchanged for 15 years. Russia without Putin, freedom for political prisoners, Putin is a thief, Russia will be free. For your understanding, all this time, world leaders were coming to meet with Putin. International companies made deals with Russia for the supply of gas and oil. The West turned a blind eye to all violations of democracy, recognized him as a president, but certainly was deeply concerned. Putin couldn't forgive Ukraine for its desire for a future without Russia. The Russian army invades the territory of the Crimean Peninsula. They hold a referendum on the annexation of Crimea to Russia. The real international independent observers were not allowed. Soldiers with machine guns were everywhere in the territory of Crimea. Back then, the Ukrainian army could not repel the attack. The number of political prisoners is growing. People are jailed for Facebook posts. For example, Boris Stamachin received 6.5 years of prison for the post "Crimea is Ukraine." After the annexation of Crimea, the Russian opposition hoped that after all the electoral fraud, corruption, beatings, illegal detentions, and political assassinations, the West would respond with strong sanctions and politically isolate Putin. But the sanctions were rather nominal, and Russia was able to adapt to them. Yes, the Russian people couldn't eat mascarpone anymore, but Putin is still a president. Even more so, after the 2013 weapon embargo, France, Germany, and Italy continued to sell arms to Russia. But the West did not recognize Crimea as Russian territory. Now propaganda not only hates Ukraine, but the whole West. The term gay rob was created. Every day on the news, TV presenters talk about the horrible United States and Europe. They come up with fake stories about how real Europeans hate their governments and how much they like Putin. Europe is morally bankrupt. It's a place where people can marry animals and parents can change the sex of their children. And of course, the institution of marriage and family also doesn't exist anymore. It's parent number 1 and parent number 2. Later, when Putin will change the constitution in order to be in power forever, he will mention that we need normal families, 2 genders, and please no transformers, meaning transgenders. In 2015, right across the street from the Kremlin, opposition politician Boris Nemtsov was assassinated. He was known for his support for Ukraine and his consistent anti-Putin rhetoric. And of course, those who ordered the murder were never found. The Russian system, if you like, is a mix of the monarchy and the Soviet KGB. Everyone worships the Tsar, he cannot be criticized, and gulags have been built for the enemies of the state, and criminal articles have been invented for those who tell political jokes. Speaking of good old Soviet methods, those who oppose Putin are imprisoned, poisoned, or killed. The tradition of political poisoning is more than 100 years old. Laboratory X, the first laboratory of military poison created by the NKVD. Opposition figures became victims of those experiments. Putin and the new KGB, FSB, are proud of this tradition and continue it. Alexander Litvinenko, Sergei Skripal, Vladimir Karamurza, Pyotr Verzilev, and Alexei Navalny. On February 24th, Putin invades Ukraine. Many journalists in the West ask me why Russians do not protest. But they are protests in Russia. I'm proud of partisans that are setting fire to military commissariats, risking their lives and freedom. Since the beginning of a full-scale war in Ukraine, political climate had changed. Now we have military censorship and a bunch of new anti-constitutional laws. Now you can go to prison for 8 years just for saying no to the war, or even for calling it a war, and not special military operation. Putin's Russia has always been crazy and absurd, but with the start of the war, this has reached a whole new level. For example, a year ago, a man came out with a poster, "No to Fascism." He was arrested, and then the official court decision was that this is discreditation of the Russian army. People that are protesting they're not Pussy Riots, and they don't have such media resource that Western newspapers write about them. So while we have such a resource, we will talk about them. I want to tell you about Alexandra Skichelenko. She's an activist of a feminist resistance movement. She's done an amazing action. She was exchanging price tags in supermarkets, and instead of the regular price, she would put a crazy amount of rubles to attract people's attention. And then it would be written, "Russian army is committing war crimes in Ukraine. This amount of children killed by Russian army." And of course, she is arrested, and now she is facing a sentence from 5 years in prison up to 15. I wasn't surprised that Putin started a full-scale war against Ukraine. Rationally, I'm not. I'm surprised that so many people, decision-makers, Western politicians, and world leaders did nothing to stop him. Pussy Riot had several speeches in European, British, and American parliaments, but after all deep concerns, many of these countries are still buying Russian gas and oil. I'm glad Britain doesn't, but do we know exactly how much of the stolen Russian money is here? How many of the kids of Russian oligarchs are already British citizens? How many of them are studying in Cambridge? Russia is not producing anything crucial to the world. All they have is gas money and resources. That's why we call Western countries for a complete embargo. All this system works on this money. They beat us, they imprison us on this money, and they kill innocent Ukrainians with this money. The only thing it takes is to stop prioritizing money over human lives, stop being hypocrites, stop being indifferent, and listen to activists. Thank you. Thank you.